Greetings, podcast listeners. In this episode, we'll be looking at how German life changed under the Nazi regime. First, let's look at the governmental organisation Kraft durch Freude, also Strength Through Joy, or rather KDF for short. Organised by the German Labour Front, it had the purpose of promoting Nazism through subsidised leisure activities and holidays, and aimed at providing incentives to workers. It was founded in 1933 and dissolved in 1939 as a result of the Second World War. So the parent organisation, the German Labour Front, was a Nazi organisation that replaced the banned trade unions. It set wages and largely benefited the employers rather than the workers. Strength Through Joy gave workers a reward for their hard work, special classes in the evenings, leisure trips to the theatre, which of course showed Nazi propaganda, picnics, and even subsidised holidays. The purpose of the KDF was to support the Führer and thank him, and keep everyone happy after abolishing the trade unions. The following podcast is based on the Cambridge A-Level History curriculum. One of the popular schemes of the KDF was the Volkswagen. In 1935, Adolf Hitler had designed a people's car, which in German is Volkswagen. Hitler gave his drawings of his Beetle car to Ferdinand Porsche to produce a prototype design, but it was not ready until the end of 1937. The first completed Volkswagen was showcased in Munich and Vienna during the Sudetenland crisis in 1938, and Hitler gave it to his girlfriend Eva Braun. The aim was to create a small family vehicle that would sell for less than 1,000 Reichsmarks and thus be affordable to the vast majority of the population. The Volkswagen was helped by the Pay Before You Get It installment scheme. Workers paid 5, 10 or 15 marks a week, and once the 750 marks had been paid in, the buyer would receive a car. On top of this, as part of the Strength Through Joy, the car's production was funded by the German Labour Front. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, in fact, of the 330,000 workers who paid for the Volkswagen, not a single one of them received one. After the huge advertising campaign with the slogan, "A car for everyone," which successfully attracted 330,000 workers, manufacturing turned to rearmament, which would be needed soon to start the Second World War. So after 125,000 men had worked to build the Autobahn and a new factory opened up for building the vehicles, the project was essentially shut down. But that was only temporary. It was in the late 1940s that Beetles were produced on a mass scale for civilians. Amazingly, with over 21.5 million produced between 1938 and 2003, the Beetle is the single longest running and most manufactured single platform car ever made. Another scheme of the KDF was sport, leisure and cultural activities. The KDF offered subsidised leisure activities that were affordable for many workers and their families, such as cheap coaching for sports like tennis, golf, skiing, sailing, and other typically upper-middle-class sports. They promoted evening classes, amateur cultural activities, recitals, and travelling art expositions. Plays were performed in factories and specially organised KDF concerts, and there were mass outings to the theatre and the opera. The KDF had its own opera which toured the country, played music in all areas across the German Reich. These activities were said to make highbrow entertainment available to the labouring man. Aside from this sort of cultural activity, 7 million people each year took part in sports-related activities run by the KDF. In December 1935, Strength Through Joy arranged for 10,000 Germans to travel to London to watch their team play England at White Hart Lane, where they eventually lost 3-0. Moving on, let's talk about these wonderful subsidised holidays which were provided to workers. For the first time, large groups of the German workforce had the opportunity of a holiday away from home. The average wage of a German worker was 30 marks, and 1 week in the Harz Mountains costed 28 marks, 1 week at the North Sea coast costed 35 marks, and a fortnight at Lake Constance costed 65 marks. Hence, this allowed at least a third of all workers to go on holiday. Workers which were better paid were able to go on international holidays, with a tour of Italy costing just 155 marks. On top of this, Strength Through Joy commissioned the building of 2 25,000-ton ships and chartered 10 others for ocean cruises. These cruises could carry 1,600 passengers, and had 40 lavatories, 100 showers, as well as 156 loudspeakers that, of course, broadcasted Nazi propaganda. The ships also contained a gymnasium and swimming pool to ensure healthy exercise on board. These cruises could travel as far as the Norwegian fjords, Madeira, Finland, Libya, Bulgaria, and Turkey. Overall, Strength Through Joy was founded in November 1933. In the year 1934, 400,000 people took part in its package tours, and this number rose to 1.7 million by 1937. On top of this, 7 million people enjoyed weekend excursions, and 1.6 million participated in organized hikes. The Colossus of Prora, or simply known as Prora, was built between 1936 and 1939 as part of Strength Through Joy. Hitler wanted Prora to be a gigantic sea resort, the most mighty and large one ever to have existed, with room for 20,000 people. It was to have a giant festival hall, able to accompany all 20,000 guests at once, 2 wave swimming pools, a cinema, a theatre, and a large dock for cruise ships. Construction began in 1936 and lasted until 1939. During the construction period, all of the major construction companies of the German Reich and almost 9,000 workers were involved in the project. By 1938, construction cost had amounted to 237.5 million Reichmarks, which is equivalent to almost €1 billion in 2009. Construction stopped in 1939 as the construction workers were transferred to producing equipment and arms due to the outbreak of the Second World War. If the complex had been completed, it would have been the single largest holiday resort in the world. Secondly, let's look at how the living standards of Germans changed under the rule of the Nazis. In terms of employment, in 1932 there were 12.6 million employed in Germany, down from 18 million before the Great Depression, while statistics showed there were 5.6 million unemployed in 1932. From 1932 to 1933, the number of those employed in Germany had increased by 0.5 million to 13.1, but somehow the number of unemployed had decreased by 1.9 million from 5.6 to 3.7. No doubt, the Nazis used this figure as propaganda. Although wages did increase from 87.7 in 1933 to 108.5 in 1938, according to the Money Wages Index, with big business wages rising by 50%, the German people did still suffer. Germany had failed to achieve autarky, and agricultural prices rose by 20%. Although they had achieved self-sufficiency in bread grains, potatoes, and sugar, they were unable to achieve it in other important foodstuffs, such as vegetables, meat, eggs, and fats. In fact, food consumption in working-class families decreased significantly. Some key figures include that from 1927 to 1937, consumption of beef decreased by 58.7%, consumption of eggs by 41.3%, wheat bread by 44.2%, tropical fruits by 37.1%, and meat products by 18.3%. Aside from this, certain areas of industry definitely benefited more than others. While the increase in income for big businesses from 1933 to 1938 was 116%, 20% of small businesses actually closed down as a result of government investment in monopolies. Meanwhile, the income of farmers increased by 41%, and for industrial workers, they had an increase of just 25% from 1933 to 1938, while they faced also an increase in their average working week hours before overtime, increasing from 43 hours in 1933 to 47 hours in 1939. However, the Nazi government did significantly enhance the quality of public welfare. From 1932 to 1938, the public expenditure had increased from 17.1 billion marks to 37.1 billion marks. This demonstrates a drastic increase in the public welfare as government spent more money on the public. Therefore, drastically improving the public welfare as the quality of transportation and quantity of construction increased, providing more facilities to the public, improving infrastructure, and 60,000 new houses being built. Well, that's the end of this episode of my podcast. I do have a question for you all. With all of what has been mentioned in this episode, how was the German life changed under the Nazi regime? Did it improve? Do you think they supported Hitler's policies? Let me know through the links in the description of this podcast. You can send in a voice message or contact me via social media. Thank you for listening to this episode of my podcast. Subscribe to be notified when the next episode is released. Goodbye.